Reading the different letters and sort of meditating on this is sort of one of the things that ends up taking over your prayer life. You ever notice that? A major, some disaster happens and you happen to be involved with it even remotely by being connected through Victory Churches. You're still connected to it, it happens, and all of a sudden your prayer life, your times of intercession, end up focusing upon Haiti, and the nation of Haiti ends up focusing upon the people there that you have names for. So as I was busy praying about the different situation and meditating on what we could do as a church, what our best step forward would be, I started thinking about some of the lessons that we could learn even at this time. And one of the first ones was that Pastor Jean Martin made a connection with Victory Churches International. This is the newest nation to join Victory Churches, but Pastor Jean Martin had reached out to make a connection, to make covenant with Victory Churches International. And what it does, we know that the scripture speaks about that two are better than one. Because if one falls down, the other can help him up. And it says a three-cord strand is not easily broken. So what we can see is when he reached out, he became part of an international family. He became part of an international mission, if you would, whatever you want to call it. And he has reached out and said, we want to make covenant. We are making covenant. He brought what he had to offer. Victory Churches brought what they had to offer. And together we're going to work to move ahead and see what God can do in the future. So he was able to receive help and was able to minister to those children at Christmas. Because he had reached out, there was a feeding program that was in place, and it's something we've done. I know when Alina was reading through the missions report this morning, she mentioned about Pastor Peter Jamshed in Pakistan, and how they have set up sewing schools there. You know, we see that word sewing schools, and it sounds good, but we don't recognize what sewing schools means. Sewing schools started in India when Drs. George and Hazel were in India, and they had a pastor there who started explaining to them that in that part of the world, the women have no value. Now, because the women have no value, when they get married, their parents are expected to continue to pay the mother of the groom annually. How many of you wish you'd raised $20? So if somebody comes along and marries your daughter, you have to pay the groom's parents because their son took your daughter. So every year, mother of the bride, father of the bride, pays the mother of the groom, and everybody lives happily ever after. But when there's a time of economic problems, they better live happily ever after. When the time of economic problems comes, all of a sudden finances are no longer available, and the bride's parents are unable to pay the groom's parents for having married this daughter off. And so they end up not being able to pay, and at that moment, this bride has no more value to her husband. He recognizes that there is hundreds of women, possibly, that are going to be willing to marry him. And on the news, you've heard for the last number of years with a thing called bride burnings. Now what this was, the husband would end up dousing his wife with kerosene and sending her into the kitchen working with the open flames until she caught fire. Now if she was fortunate, often she would die. The husband was then released that he could go out and he could get himself a new wife and start collecting annually from the new parents. If she was not so fortunate, she would end up suffering horribly, ending up in the hospital and now being grossly deformed or disfigured because of the flames that had been all over her. And these women just had no place. And as the pastor was talking to Dr. George and Hazel about this custom, it just started moving Pastor Hazel's heart. She says, there's got to be something that we can do for these people. So she spent the night not sleeping. She spent the night not praying and interceding. And she says, God, what do we do? How can we change? How can we help these women? This is not right, what's going on. This is an injustice. And she started praying and asking for wisdom. And God answered. In the morning she got off her knees. She says, okay, this is what we're going to do. She says, we're going to set up sewing schools. She said, we can get the churches in North America to start providing sewing machines. then we can train these ladies on a job, and if they have a job, they now become seamstresses, they're going to start having value to their families. Now they can go out, they can sew, and they can make money, and when they're making money, the husbands are quite happy to live with them because they're bringing in and they have value. Now I know in our mind, we can't understand these customs. This is so totally different than we've been raised at. So that was one of the first things that started. The churches in North America would sponsor one of these women, and they would buy a sewing machine for them, and they would set up places where these women could come and learn how to sew. And as they said, you know, it's like our KP Yohanan makes the comment. He says, you can help somebody go to hell more comfortably. If you're just feeding them or just dressing them, they're not yet going to heaven. They need to hear the message of Jesus Christ. So they said, okay, these women could get instruction in sewing. Once they have gone through a period of time for however long the instruction is, once they've gone through that amount of instruction, they get to leave the sewing school with their sewing machine. That now becomes theirs, so they can go into their homes and they can start sewing in their homes and start making items to sell and start earning money. So they said, okay, so something has to be done here though. So if these women want to get this free instruction, this free sewing machine, they have to get the training, but during that time they also come in and they get some Bible teaching every day. They get to know that Jesus Christ is the one, the true, and the living way, that there is no other way to the Father but by Him. So they ended up saying a lot of the women, a number of the women, had ended up receiving Christ and would then go home and start sharing with their families, and whole families were coming to know Jesus through the sewing schools. But that wasn't enough. They said, you know, a lot of these women are having a hard time coming because they had children and they didn't want the children just running around on the streets. So they started setting up classes where they could teach the children how to read and write. And of course they used the Bible as their textbook. So children were ending up getting saved. Wives were ending up getting saved. Wives are able to bring their husbands to the Lord. And families are getting saved because somebody became proactive and said, let's not give them a hand out, but a hand up. And that's part of the victory philosophy. We're here to give you a hand up. We're not going to give you a handout. It's not for free. You're going to work for it. You're going to earn it. You're going to walk away with pride and dignity, knowing that you've accomplished this. Yes, we all need help. Every one of us needs help at one point. But just to give somebody $100, you're going to feed them for a couple of meals and then they're done. A couple of months, depending where in the world you live. But then you're done. If you teach them now to sew and give them a sewing machine, they now have the tools that they can go on. So I was just quite impressed with the sewing machine, sewing schools, but I wanted to come back to when Pastor Joe Martin reached out. He was able to reach out to Victory Church International and say, we have children and we want to be able to minister. Can you help? We said, we'll help them. So right here from Plum Coulee, Manitoba, we were able to reach out and help children in Haiti just before the earthquake came. Now it says they spent time talking to them, ministering to them, singing Christian songs with them. These children got to hear the gospel. These children got to know that there was something different. Well, the Bible teaches us the whole body is built up when one person comes to know Christ. But this company rejoices and we cry with Pastor Joe Martin and his group. I cannot imagine the horrors that the church in Haiti has to endure at this time. I cannot imagine what it must be like as a pastor to try and operate in that type of destruction, in that type of devastation. But I do know that we may very well have been instrumental in ensuring that some of those children went to heaven instead of hell. And that's what it boils down to. You know, we can argue about theology, we can argue about this, we can argue about that, but what it comes down to is, are they spending eternity with Christ, or are they not? Some of those children may very well be in heaven today because of what we did. When we start recognizing all of a sudden what some of these things are, what people face in other parts of the world, I believe it has to make us stop and realize that some of the things we take for granted, really, we shouldn't be taking for granted. I'm going to share a little story of Pastor Jerry. I don't know. Hopefully she won't be too offended. We went to shop. We went shopping.